Her son refused to drive her 10 minutes to the doctor who'd asked she not come alone. Maggie Lane, widow and grandmother, didn't argue. Brian smirked. Lori chimed in, and the appointment was quietly canceled. By the end of summer, his car, the one she'd bought, insured and kept in her name, would belong to someone else. She'd raised him, helped him start his life, and kept every favor in silent storage. Now she was ready to cash them in, one signature at a time. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. He wouldn't drive her 10 minutes. Maggie Lane felt the insult settle in her chest like a stone as she stood in the kitchen, sunlight falling in a bright square across the linoleum. The air smelled faintly of coffee and lemon cleaner. Outside, a wren hopped along the porch railing, its head twitching at every movement, while inside her son sat sprawled in the den, laptop open, television murmuring low. "Brian," she called, leaning on the doorframe. "I've got my appointment at 2, can you drive me?" Her voice was light, careful, the way she'd learned to ask when she didn't want to be told no. Without looking away from the screen, he said, "Can't. Slammed today." He flicked at the trackpad like swatting a fly. "It's just down on Habersham," she pressed. 10 minutes 15 if the lights are bad. Brian finally glanced up, his mouth curling in that half smile that pretended to be polite. "Take the bus. Or one of those ride apps. It's not the Stone Age." Lori appeared from the hallway, her peach sweatshirt soft against the morning light. She carried her coffee like a prop. "You should plan these things better, Maggie," she said. Not unkindly, but with the sort of pointed tone that stung more than outright rudeness. "We've got a lot on our plates." Maggie could have told them the doctor had asked her to bring someone, or that the new medication made her feel off balance some days. She could have reminded them she'd been the one who taught Brian how to parallel park, who'd sat up through nights of his childhood fevers. Instead, she nodded once. "Don't worry about it." She walked back to the kitchen, the ticking wall clock suddenly too loud. The lemons in their white ceramic bowl looked almost smug in the light. She called the clinic, canceled the appointment, and told the young woman on the other end she'd reschedule another time. The rest of the day dragged. Maggie folded towels, smoothed them with deliberate care, trying to quiet the thrum of frustration in her chest. From the hallway came bursts of Lori's laughter, then low conversation with Brian about weekend plans and coolers, and someone bringing ice. At lunch, Maggie ate cold chicken salad by the window, watching oak shadows shift across the driveway like dark, slow-moving water. By evening, the summer heat had softened, and the cicadas' thin electric buzz hummed through the live oaks draped in Spanish moss. She slipped on her denim jacket and walked the 3 blocks to Darlene Ross's house. Her sandals scuffed the old sidewalk, the warm air carrying the faint scent of cut grass. Darlene's porch light glowed gold above a weathered blue mailbox. She opened the door before Maggie could knock, the familiar powdery scent of her perfume spilling into the night. "You look like you've been holding something you don't want to drop," Darlene said, ushering her into the tidy kitchen. The room was comfortingly familiar, jar of peppermints on the counter, Georgia-shaped magnet on the fridge, framed DMV retirement certificate on the wall. Darlene poured sweet tea into glasses beaded with condensation, lemon slices drifting on top. "I canceled my appointment," Maggie said, leaning on the counter. "Brian said he was slammed. Lori said I should plan better." Darlene's eyebrows shot up. "That boy forgets who kept him in clean socks for 18 years. "I didn't want to argue," Maggie said, swirling the ice in her glass. "It wasn't worth it. And you shouldn't have to explain why it mattered," Darlene replied, her voice tightening. She took a slow sip, then set the glass down with a soft thud. "Didn't you help him buy that car?" The word hung in the air. Maggie's mind drifted back to the day of the purchase, her hand signing the paperwork, Brian grinning in the driver's seat, her telling herself she was just helping him get started. She could picture the envelope still tucked away in her hall closet safe, labeled in bold black marker vehicle. "Yes," she said slowly. The memory settling like a stone in still water, Darlene leaned forward, her gaze sharpening. What's the title say? Maggie's hand went instinctively to her purse. She could almost feel the grain of the manila folder and the crisp edge of the document inside. A small, deliberate smile tugged at her lips. She met her friend's eyes and said quietly, "The title's still in my name." When Maggie got home from Darlene's, the night air still clung to her clothes, warm and faintly scented with honeysuckle. She hung her denim jacket on the hall hook and walked straight to the closet at the end of the hallway. The safe was tucked behind a row of shoeboxes, the metal cold beneath her fingers. She turned the dial, listening to the clicks like a secret language, only she understood. Inside, under the neatly stacked folders, insurance, medical, taxes was the one marked in thick black letters. Vehicle, her own handwriting, deliberate and even. She slid the manila folder out and carried it to the kitchen table. The document inside was crisp, still smelling faintly of toner. There it was, her name printed in bold, her address neatly typed beneath it. Brian's name was nowhere on the page. She traced her finger over the line that read legal owner, the ink flat and unyielding under her touch. She didn't smile. Not yet. The next morning, she called Carl Weaver's office. The man had been her late husband's attorney, and more importantly, had the patience of someone who'd spent a lifetime untangling other people's messes. His voice on the phone was calm, clipped, professional. "You have sole ownership, Maggie," he said after she read the key lines to him. She could hear him adjusting his glasses on the other end. A little paper shuffle in the background. "If your name's on the title, and his isn't, you have full authority over it. No dispute there." She glanced toward the window, where the sunlight caught the dust motes drifting in the air. "Even if I wanted to sell it?" she asked, the question slow, testing. "Even then," Carl replied. "As far as the state's concerned, it's yours. Period." Maggie sat back in her chair, the wood creaking beneath her. She could almost feel Darlene's voice still in the room, the way she'd leaned forward last night. Later that afternoon, Darlene stopped by with a half-dozen blueberry muffins in a foil-covered pan. She set them on the counter and listened without interruption as Maggie told her about the call with Carl. "You could sell it tomorrow if you wanted," Darlene said, peeling back the foil, the steam of fresh-baked blueberries rising between them. "Drive it right down to a dealership, sign the back of the title, and walk out with cash." Maggie tore off a small piece of muffin, the sugar crunching softly between her teeth. "It'd make a statement. It'd make a point," Darlene corrected. The idea hung in the air, warm and dangerous. The next morning, Maggie brewed coffee strong enough to feel in her bones. She sat at the table with the mug between her palms, steam curling toward her face. Outside, the early sun laid gold across the street, the moss and the oaks stirring in the breeze. She wasn't rushing into anything, she told herself, just considering possibilities. Still, the thought lodged itself firmly in her mind. She could decide how this ended. Halfway through her coffee, her phone buzzed with a notification. Brian had posted something on social media, one of those over-filtered photos with a caption, "New rims, baby." The picture showed the car gleaming in the driveway, silver wheels catching the light. His reflection was faintly visible in the door, standing back to admire it. Maggie stared at the screen. She thought of the title, sitting in its folder just feet away, and of how easily the reality could tilt under him. That afternoon, she called Carl again. He picked up on the second ring, the faint clack of a keyboard in the background. "Carl," she said, her voice even hypothetically, "if I wanted to make a move on this, what would it take?" There was a pause, the quiet hum of office air conditioning filtering through the line. Finally Carl spoke. "Want me to draft a transfer form?" Maggie sat at her kitchen table with the title spread out in front of her, the crisp paper catching the afternoon light. Carl's voice from yesterday still echoed in her mind, calm, matter of fact, and entirely on her side. She picked up her phone, pressed his number, and agreed to meet him the next morning. Carl Weaver's office sat in a two-story brick building, just off Bull Street, the kind of place with brass door handles and the faint scent of old paper. Inside, His desk was an organized sprawl of legal pads, manila folders, and a single green banker's lamp casting a warm glow. He looked up as she entered, his reading glasses perched halfway down his nose. "You've decided to move forward," he said, not as a question but as a quiet observation. Maggie nodded, sliding the title across the desk. "Let's keep the buyer blank for now. Just be ready." Carl adjusted the pages, the soft scratch of his pen filling in dates, signatures, and the necessary legal lines. The papers smelled faintly of fresh ink. "This keeps all your options open," he said, handing her the document to review. On her way out, the bell above the door jingled, and the crisp November air rushed in. Maggie's phone buzzed in her pocket. It was Darlene. "How'd it go?" her friend asked. "Clean and quiet," Maggie replied. "Buyer's name still open." "That's perfect," Darlene said, her voice taking on a conspiratorial edge. "You know Eddie Morales over at Riverfront Motors? Runs the best used lot in town, and he's a friend. I can connect you. He won't waste your time." By the time Maggie got home, she'd already looked up Riverfront Motors online. Eddie's picture was front and center, a tan, middle-aged man with a broad grin and an arm resting on a cherry-red Mustang. The lot's inventory gleamed in photo after photo, sunlight bouncing off polished hoods. That evening she sat at her laptop and checked the value of Brian's car. The numbers on the screen made her eyebrows lift. Even with the mileage, it was worth more than she'd guessed. A small pulse of satisfaction ran through her, confirmation that the leverage she held wasn't just emotional, it was tangible. The next morning she called the dealership. Eddie's voice came through warm and friendly, like a man used to putting people at ease. "Darlene told me you might be calling. Bring it by and I'll give you an honest number. No games." Maggie glanced toward the driveway, where her own sedan sat, modest and a little faded. "I'll need to arrange for that," she said. "Soon. Whenever you're ready," Eddie said. "I'll make time for you." The timing came to her faster than she expected. 2 days later, her phone rang just after lunch. The display read Lori. "Hey Maggie," Lori said, in that airy tone she used when she wanted something. "Brian and I have a thing on Saturday. Any chance you could watch the kids for a few hours? We'd drop them off mid-morning. They can bring their tablets and snacks, so you won't have to do much." Maggie kept her voice even. "Of course. Bring them by whenever you need to." Lori exhaled with relief. "Thanks, Maggie. You're a lifesaver." Maggie ended the call and set her phone down on the counter. Outside, the wind stirred the moss in the oaks, swaying gently over the quiet street. Saturday, she thought. That would mean Brian's car in her driveway, keys in her hand, and no questions until they came back. She smiled to herself, a slow, measured curve of the lips, and reached for her coffee. "Yes," she murmured, though no one was there to hear it. "Saturday will do just fine." Saturday morning broke bright and cool, the kind of Savannah day where the sun found every gap between the moss-covered branches and painted gold streaks across the pavement. Maggie had been ready since 9, coffee made, coat hanging by the door, title folder tucked into her tote. At 9:32, Brian's SUV rolled into her driveway. She could hear the crunch of the tires on gravel before she saw them. The engine cut off, and the quiet was filled with the quick slam of car doors and the patter of sneakers up her front walk. "Grandma," the kids called, both talking at once about a video game level they'd beaten. Lori followed, hair pulled into a sleek bun, sunglasses still on despite the shade. Brian came last, tossing the keys into Maggie's hand without ceremony. The weight of them hit her palm, cold metal against her skin. "Tank's full," he said. "We'll be back late afternoon. Don't let them have too much sugar." Maggie smiled in that practiced neutral way. "We'll have fun." Once they were gone, the house felt lighter, freer. She made the kids pancakes, listening to their chatter over the faint sizzle on the griddle. After breakfast, she suggested a trip to the park, and they agreed instantly. She slipped the keys into her pocket, the metal edges pressing against the fabric like a reminder. The park was only a few minutes away, oak-shaded and lined with wooden benches. The scent of pine mulch hung in the air. While the kids raced toward the swings, Maggie spotted Darlene's beige sedan pulling into a space 2 rows down. Darlene stepped out, sunglasses perched on her head, carrying her purse like it was part of the plan, which it was. Perfect timing, she said, glancing toward the playground to make sure the kids were out of earshot. They swapped keys with a quick, subtle movement, Maggie pressing Brian's into Darlene's palm and taking hers in return. "I'll bring them back in your car in an hour," Maggie said. Darlene nodded, the faintest smirk on her lips. "I'll keep them busy. You go make history." Sliding into Brian's driver's seat felt strange, like wearing someone else's coat, familiar in shape, but not hers. The leather was still warm from the morning sun, smelling faintly of the citrus air freshener Brian used. She adjusted the mirrors, started the engine and pulled away from the park, her heart ticking faster with each turn toward Riverfront Motors. The dealership sat on a stretch of road just past the riverfront warehouses, the lot neat and crowded with rows of polished vehicles. Eddie was outside talking to a young couple when he spotted her. He excused himself and walked over, his handshake firm, his grin immediate. "You must be Maggie," he said. "Darlene told me you've got something I should see." Maggie handed him the keys without a word. He walked a slow circle around the SUV, his trained eyes catching every detail: the new rims, the shine of the paint, the faint scuff near the rear bumper. He popped the hood, checked the engine, then slid into the driver's seat and turned it over. The low hum of the motor was smooth and even. "This," Eddie said after a long moment, "is a clean vehicle, well kept, no obvious issues. I can make you a cash offer right now." They stood beside the car as he named a figure. It was higher than Maggie expected, the number settling in her chest like an anchor. "Solid. I'll take it," she said, her voice steady. Eddie didn't blink. "Good. Let's make it official." Inside his small glass-walled office, the faint smell of motor oil mixed with brewed coffee from a corner machine. Eddie typed quickly, his fingers moving over the keyboard with practiced efficiency. Papers slid from the printer into a neat stack between them. He looked up, his expression businesslike, but friendly. "I'll need that signed title today." Maggie sat across from Eddie in the glass-walled office, the title spread between them like a silent verdict. The papers still smelled faintly of the safe they'd been locked in, of the faint trace of lemon clip from her kitchen. Eddie slid a black pen toward her. "All it needs is your signature, right here," he said, tapping the line with a blunt fingertip. Her hand was steady as she signed, full first name, middle initial, last name. The pen's tip glided over the paper, each stroke a quiet declaration. She blotted the ink with the side of her palm, as if sealing it into fact. Eddie checked the page, nodded, and reached for a plain white envelope. From it, he pulled a cashier's check. The paper was thick, the printed numbers more than she'd dared hope for. "This is yours," he said, sliding it across the desk. "You just made yourself a very good deal." The weight of the check in her hand was unlike any she'd felt in years. Real, immediate, impossible to ignore. "Thank you," Maggie said, her voice low. Eddie walked her to the lot, holding the door as a warm breeze carried in the smell of exhaust and sun-heated asphalt. "Tell Darlene I owe her lunch for the referral," he called as she left. She drove Darlene's sedan straight to the bank. The marble-floored lobby smelled faintly of floor polish and fresh paper. Darlene was waiting by the teller line, her grin wide enough to match the moment. "You really did it," Darlene said under her breath as they stepped forward. Maggie passed the check to the teller, the cool glass counter smooth beneath her fingers. "Straight to deposit," she said. The printer hummed, spitting out the receipt, confirmation that the deal wasn't just done, it was secured. Outside, the sun was higher, the heat pressing gently against her skin. She and Darlene stood for a moment beside the sedan, the faint metallic ping of cooling engines from the lot filling the pause. Carl's number lit up Maggie's phone before she could put her key in the ignition. She answered, tucking the phone between her shoulder and ear. "It's all clean," Carl said. "No outstanding liens, no holds. Once the DMV processes the transfer, it's completely out of your name." Maggie let out a breath. she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Good to hear. Keep your copies of the paperwork somewhere safe, Carl added. But otherwise, you're clear. After they hung up, Maggie slid her keys back onto her ring, the small brass Brian had given her years ago still there, his house key. She rolled it between her fingers for a second, thinking about all the times she'd used it to feed the cat, water the plants, or drop off birthday gifts for the kids. By 2 o'clock, she was pulling into her driveway, the air thick with the scent of warm pine from the yard. The house was silent, exactly as she'd left it. She put Darlene's keys on the counter and waited for the sound of the kids' laughter to fill the rooms again. She reheated leftover soup, the microwave humming steadily, and set the table for 3. At 4:15, the sound of tires crunching over gravel broke the quiet. Maggie stood, expecting the quick shuffle of small shoes inside. Instead, her phone buzzed in her hand. "Brian," she answered, the casual hello halfway out of her mouth when his voice came through tight, almost breathless. "Where's my car?" The words weren't a question so much as an accusation, raw and sharp through the line. Maggie kept the phone pressed to her ear, listening to her son's ragged breathing on the other end. The late afternoon light slanted across her living room, painting the rug in long golden stripes. Darlene sat in the armchair opposite, one leg tucked under her, sipping sweet tea from a tall glass like she had front row seats to the truth. "What do you mean, where's your car?" Maggie asked evenly, as if she'd been asked about the weather. "You know exactly what I mean." Brian's voice cracked, the sharp edge of panic creeping in. "It's gone, Mom. Gone. I left it here this morning, and now it's not in the driveway." Maggie leaned back into the couch cushions, the faint squeak of fabric punctuating her next words. "That's because I sold it." There was a beat of silence, so complete she could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. You what?" His voice was lower now, dangerous. "I sold it," Maggie repeated, her tone unhurried. "The title was in my name, always has been. Legally it was never yours." From the speaker came a muffled shuffle, then Laurie's voice cut in, sharp and breathy. "This is spiteful, Maggie. You've taken this way too far." Maggie's eyes moved to Darlene, who raised her eyebrows over the rim of her glass. "I exercised my rights," Maggie said, her voice calm but steady enough to hold weight. "It was my car, on my title, and I decided to sell it. That's all there is to it." "You can't just do that," Brian barked, the volume making Darlene wince slightly. "I just did," Maggie replied. Laurie made a sound like a bitter laugh. "This is about that ride to your appointment, isn't it? You're punishing us over something petty." Maggie's gaze drifted to the window, where the moss swayed gently in the breeze. "It's about being treated like an afterthought," she said. "It's about remembering I have a say in my own property." Darlene set her glass down with a quiet click. "You tell him, girl," she murmured, almost to herself. Brian's voice came back, louder now. "You've made a huge mistake. I'll take you to court if I have to. I'm not letting you just walk away with my car." "Your car?" Maggie asked, leaning forward, elbows on her knees. "The one I paid for, insured and kept in my name, because you couldn't qualify for financing." "That car?" Another pause, longer this time. She could almost hear the weight of the facts pressing on him. "Mom," he started, but Maggie cut in. "I've spoken to Carl. Everything was legal and above board. There's nothing you can do." The silence on the line turned cold. Then Laurie muttered something Maggie couldn't catch, followed by Brian's clipped, "We'll see about that." Maggie glanced at Darlene, who was now swirling the ice in her glass, like she was listening to a podcast she'd been waiting all week to hear. "Brian," Maggie said, softening her tone only slightly, "you've got kids to think about. Focus on them. Let this go." Her son didn't answer. The call ended abruptly with the flat click of disconnection. Almost instantly her phone buzzed again, but this time it was a new email notification. Carl Weaver's name appeared in the subject line. Maggie opened it, scanning the first few lines. "Attached, please find a scanned copy of the signed bill of sale for the vehicle in question." This confirms the legal transfer of ownership. A second later, she saw the CC list. Brian's email address sat right there. Carl had sent it to both of them. By Sunday morning, the phone calls started not from Brian, but from cousins and aunt in Macon, even Maggie's second cousin, who only called at Christmas. Each voice carried the same tone. I heard about the car. What happened? Maggie sat at her kitchen table, the folder from Carl open like a shield. She slid out the photocopied title, her name bold and solitary on the legal owner line, then the fresh bill of sale signed by Eddie. I owned it outright, she told them all, her voice as steady as the ticking wall clock. I sold it legally, that's the whole story. She made sure they heard the unshakable certainty in her words before ending each call. By mid-afternoon, the whispers had shifted online. Lori's social media brimmed with vague, sugar-coated daggers. Some people will sell out family for pocket change. Funny how loyalty only goes one way. She never named Maggie, but the comments section did the work for her. Friends and neighbors guessing, tagging, speculating. Darlene called after spotting one of the posts. Ignore it, she advised. People like her think public sympathy is a currency. Yours is worth more. It was easier to ignore once Eddie called with an update. Maggie, he said, his tone brisk and satisfied. Car's already re-registered. New owners got it. You're out of the loop entirely. She pictured Brian's face if he ever tried to track it down, only to find the trail cold. The mental image made her lips twitch into something dangerously close to a smile. That evening, she and Darlene drove into the historic district for dinner at the old pink house. The air smelled faintly of salt from the nearby river, the brick sidewalks uneven under their heels. Inside, the dining room was all candlelight and polished wood, the low murmur of conversation blending with the soft clink of silverware. Maggie ordered pecan-crusted flounder with collard greens, savoring each bite like a victory she didn't have to brag about. Darlene lifted her wine glass toward her. To being in the clear, she said. Maggie met the toast. And staying there. After dessert, they lingered over coffee, watching the flicker of candles reflected in the restaurant's tall windows. Maggie felt lighter than she had in months. The weight of obligation shifted entirely off her shoulders. Outside, the night was cool, the lamplight pooling in soft golden circles along the street. As they walked toward Darlene's car, Maggie's phone buzzed. Eddie's name lit the screen. She answered, curious. You know, Eddie began, his voice casual but with an edge of suggestion, now that you've got cash in hand, I could help you find a new car for yourself. Something reliable. Something that's all yours. Maggie paused under the glow of a street lamp, the moss above her swaying like slow-moving curtains. I might just take you up on that, she said. Maggie arrived at Riverfront Motors just after 10, the sky a perfect, endless blue. The lot gleamed in the sun, rows of polished hoods reflecting the light like still ponds. Eddie was waiting near the front office, coffee in one hand, keys jangling in the other. Morning, Maggie, he greeted, that easy grin in place. Ready to shop for your ride? She nodded, a small spark of anticipation tightening in her chest. Darlene stepped out from behind a row of SUVs, wearing sunglasses and holding a clipboard like they were about to shoot a commercial. I told him no nonsense, she said. We're finding something reliable, not flashy. Eddie led them to a sleek silver sedan, parked under the shade of a sprawling oak. 2 years old, low mileage, one owner, runs smooth, good on gas, and it's got heated seats. Figured you might appreciate that in the winter. Maggie slid into the driver's seat, the faint new car scent still lingering. Her fingers curled around the leather-wrapped steering wheel, cool and firm. The dash lights flickered to life when she turned the key, a quiet purr from the engine filling the air. They took it for a test drive, following the road out toward the river. The breeze through the open windows carried the briny tang of the water. Maggie kept her hands steady on the wheel, feeling the car's smooth response with every turn. This feels like mine, she said quietly. Back at the lot, Eddie quoted a price that made her eyebrows lift, not low but fair. She reached into her tote, pulling out the cashier's check from the sale. The paper felt cool and thick between her fingers as she slid it across his desk. "I'll pay in full," she said. The transaction was quick, Eddie moving with the efficiency of a man who'd done this 1,000 times. Darlene hovered nearby, occasionally leaning in to double-check a line on the paperwork. The final signature felt different than the one she'd made days ago at the sale. It was lighter, unburdened. When the keys were officially hers, Maggie drove off the lot with Darlene in the passenger seat. "Let's take the long way," she suggested. They wound along River Street, the cobblestones rumbling softly under the tires, the scent of fried seafood drifting from the open doors of restaurants. Tourists wandered along the waterfront, ice cream cones in hand, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Maggie slowed at a bend where the water widened, the sunlight scattering across its surface. She felt, for the first time in months, entirely in control. They looped through downtown, before heading back toward her neighborhood. As they turned onto her street, a flash of movement caught her eye, a familiar figure stepping off a curb, grocery bags in hand. "Lori." The moment Lori's gaze landed on the silver sedan, she froze. Her expression shifted in an instant, from confusion to recognition to something sharp and simmering. Maggie kept her face neutral, giving the smallest nod before driving past. By the time she parked in her driveway, her phone was buzzing. She checked the screen. A text from Brian, "Nice wheels." Darlene leaned over to peek. "Well, at least he noticed," she said dryly. Maggie set the phone face down on the console, refusing to let the message take root. She stepped out of the car, the sun warm on her shoulders, and locked the door with a satisfying beep. Later that afternoon, while she was making tea in the kitchen, her phone rang again. Carl's voice came through, steady and matter-of-fact as always. "Maggie," he said, "now that things have shifted, I think it's a good time to revisit your will." The next morning, Maggie sat at Carl Weaver's desk, the blinds half closed against the sharp Savannah sun. His office smelled faintly of polished wood, and the faint bite of toner from the humming printer behind him. Stacks of neat files lined the credenza, each labeled in his meticulous handwriting. Carl folded his hands. "You've already made it clear you want your affairs in order. If you're ready to make changes, today's a good day to do it." Maggie set her purse on the floor beside her and met his eyes. "I want Brian and Lori removed as beneficiaries. Completely." Carl didn't flinch. He simply pulled a fresh sheet from a yellow legal pad. "Understood. And the new beneficiary?" "A local cause," she said. "Something that'll actually appreciate it." It was Darlene who had suggested the animal shelter, Safe Harbor Rescue. Maggie had driven past it for years without stopping. A low brick building, with a bright blue paw print painted on the side. "They do a lot of good," Darlene had told her. "No politics, no nonsense, just saving animals." Carl nodded as he typed the details into a fresh draft. The keys of his keyboard clicked softly, precise as a clock. Assets, property, savings, everything outside of personal keepsakes. "Yes," Maggie confirmed. Her voice was even, but her hands resting in her lap were warm with the quiet heat of finality. When the draft was ready, Carl slid it across the desk. The paper was cool beneath her fingertips. Each line she read felt like a small door closing behind her. The names Brian Lane and Lori Lane appeared once in the section revoking their inheritance. In their place, the official name and address of Safe Harbor Rescue now stood. Carl called Darlene in from the reception area to witness the signing. She leaned over Maggie's shoulder, her perfume a familiar powdery note in the air, and gave her a quick approving nod before picking up the pen. When Maggie signed the final page, the pen's tip whispered across the paper, leaving black ink in her neat, deliberate hand. Carl gathered the documents, tapped them into alignment, and slid them into a cream-colored folder. "That's it," he said. "Legally binding, effective immediately." Walking out into the midday light, Maggie felt something she hadn't in years: weightless. The live oaks along the sidewalk swayed in the breeze, scattering dappled light across her new silver sedan. Darlene slipped on her sunglasses and grinned. You look 10 years younger. Feels like it, Maggie replied. That evening, she waited for the inevitable call from Brian. It never came, nor did it the next day, or the day after that. His silence was not the kind that invited peace. It was the heavy kind, the kind that marked a line drawn deep in the sand. She didn't mind. A week later, she found an envelope in her mailbox from Safe Harbor Rescue. The paper inside was bright white, the header cheerful with that same blue paw print she'd seen on the building. Dear Miss Lane, it began. We were deeply moved to learn of your generous planned gift to Safe Harbor. Your support will help us provide shelter, medical care, and loving homes for countless animals. We'd love to thank you in person. Please consider visiting our facility for a tour. The letter was signed by the shelter director, with a phone number neatly printed beneath her name. Maggie stood on her porch, the scent of warm pine and distant salt water drifting through the air. The pages of the letter fluttered slightly in the breeze. She looked up at the quiet street, then back at the blue paw print in the header. Her lips curved into a slow smile. 2 days after the letter arrived, Maggie drove to Safe Harbor Rescue. The morning air was cool and smelled faintly of salt from the river, the kind of air that carried possibility. The shelter sat at the end of a quiet lane, a low brick building with white trim and the cheerful blue paw print painted near the entrance. A wind chime over the door tinkled softly as she stepped inside. The scent hit first: clean straw, mild soap, and the warm, earthy musk of animals. Behind the counter, a woman with curly auburn hair and smile lines around her eyes looked up. You must be Mrs. Lane, she said. I'm Paula, the director. Thank you for coming. Paula led her through a corridor lined with kennels. Dogs stirred as they passed, some leaping up, tails thumping, others lifting sleepy eyes from soft blankets. Their barks and whines filled the space, a chorus of need and hope. Maggie stopped at each kennel, her fingers curling lightly around the metal bars, murmuring soft greetings. They rounded a corner, and Maggie saw her. A medium-sized golden retriever mix, muzzle graying, eyes deep brown and calm. The dog stood slowly, tail wagging in an unhurried rhythm. This is Molly, Paula said. She's 9, sweet as they come. Her owner passed away a month ago, so she's been adjusting. Maggie crouched, the concrete floor cool beneath her knees. Molly stepped forward and pressed her head gently against Maggie's palm. The contact was warm, deliberate, as if she had been waiting for this exact moment. I think she's perfect, Maggie murmured. By the time they returned to the lobby, the adoption paperwork was in motion. Paula moved briskly, explaining medical history, temperament notes, and care routines. The pen felt familiar in Maggie's hand as she signed her name one more time that month. Another quiet act of claiming. On the way home, Maggie stopped at the local pet store. The place smelled of cedar shavings and leather collars. She picked out a soft plaid dog bed, a stainless steel water bowl, and a bag of food Paula had recommended. A small plush squeaky toy, shaped like a squirrel, found its way into her cart without much thought. Back at the house, Paula helped her carry the items inside. Together they set up a cozy corner in the sunny front room. The plaid bed tucked between a bookshelf and the window where Molly could watch the street. The dog circled the bed twice before settling with a sigh, her eyes half closing in instant comfort. She's going to stick to you like glue, Paula said with a smile. And she did. Within days, Molly's soft footfalls were a constant presence, following Maggie from kitchen to garden, curling at her feet when she read in the evening, waiting patiently by the door when she put on her coat. Her gentle breathing at night was a new kind of reassurance. That Friday, Maggie took a picture, Molly resting in her bed, sunlight turning her fur to gold. She posted it on her Facebook page with the caption, "Meet Molly. She rescued me as much as I rescued her." The response was immediate. Friends, neighbors, even acquaintances she hadn't spoken to in years left comments and heart emojis. Beautiful girl. What a lucky dog. You two are a perfect match. Scrolling through the flood of kindness, Maggie felt something warm unfurl in her chest. She had expected approval, maybe, but not this swell of genuine affection from her community. Then her eyes caught on one comment, buried between the others. From Lori, must be nice to have the time and money for this sort of thing. Maggie stared at Lori's comment, flat words on a glowing screen, but refused to give them weight. Molly shifted on her bed nearby, the soft rustle of fur against fabric grounding Maggie more than any typed rebuttal could. She set the phone down on the table and let it buzz quietly as more notifications rolled in. Within minutes, her friends stepped in where she had chosen silence. "She deserves it," one wrote. "After everything she's done for her family." Another, "Some people should think twice before making snide remarks in public." It snowballed from there, neighbors chiming in, old coworkers recalling how Maggie had driven miles out of her way to help them. Even one of Brian's old school friends posting, "Funny, I remember her paying for his first car too." Maggie didn't type a word. She sipped her tea instead, the steam curling up to meet her face, and listened to the faint tick of the wall clock. The conversation online unfolded without her, a slow, quiet victory measured in the way Lori's comment sank further and further down the thread. By the next morning, it was gone entirely. Lori had deleted it. Darlene showed up at 10, wearing her oversized sunglasses and holding a cardboard tray with 2 steaming cups of coffee. She set one in front of Maggie and plopped into the chair opposite. "I saw the comments gone," Darlene said, tearing open a sugar packet with the precision of someone unwrapping a gift. "Guess she realized she stepped in something." Maggie lifted her coffee. "I didn't have to lift a finger. That's the best kind of fight." Darlene grinned. "The one you win just by showing up." They lingered over coffee, the rich smell filling the kitchen. Outside, the day was bright and breezy, the kind that begged for fresh air. By early afternoon, Maggie clipped Molly's leash to her collar and set out for a walk. The streets were quiet, the sound of Molly's nails clicking against the sidewalk, mingling with the rustle of wind through the live oaks. Sunlight dappled across the pavement, shifting as the branches swayed. They passed the little bakery on the corner, its door propped open so the warm scent of cinnamon rolls spilled onto the street. For the first time in weeks, Maggie's shoulders felt loose. No confrontation, no tense phone calls, just the rhythm of her own steps and the steady pull of the leash. Molly stopped now and then to sniff at something, only she found interesting, her tail wagging in a lazy arc. When they returned home, Maggie set a bowl of water on the porch for Molly and sank into the rocking chair with a satisfied sigh. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Eddie. The picture was grainy, clearly taken quickly, but Maggie recognized the SUV instantly. Brian's old car, now parked on a different lot across town. The caption from Eddie read, "Sold again already. Guess it's making the rounds." Maggie studied the image for a moment. The vehicle looked smaller now, somehow diminished without the weight of Brian's entitlement attached to it. She set the phone aside and listened to Molly's slow, steady drinking from the water bowl. The peace of the moment was interrupted by the sharp trill of her phone ringing. The screen lit with Carl's name. "Maggie," he said, when she answered, his tone brisk but warm, "I just got word of a charity fundraiser downtown. I think you'd enjoy it, and it might be a good opportunity for you." The ballroom at the DeSoto Hotel glowed under crystal chandeliers, the air humming with the low murmur of conversation and the clink of silverware. Maggie stood just inside the entrance, smoothing the front of her navy dress. The scent of roses from the centerpiece arrangements mingled with the faint aroma of seared steak wafting from the kitchen. Carl appeared at her side, crisp in a dark suit, his tie the same deep red as the folded napkins on the tables. "You clean up well," he said, with a small grin. "Come on, your seat's up front." Up front. Maggie followed him through the maze of tables draped in white linen, past clusters of well-dressed guests, greeting one another with air kisses and warm handshakes. At the largest round table near the stage, Carl pulled out a chair for her, right next to a woman in a tailored coral suit with the kind of posture that spoke of years in the public eye. "Maggie Lane, this is Mayor Whitaker," Carl said. The mayor's handshake was firm, her smile quick and genuine. Carl's told me you've recently made quite an impact with a certain charitable decision, she said. It's a pleasure to meet you. Dinner began, salad of local greens with pecans and goat cheese, followed by perfectly seared salmon with lemon butter. Maggie listened as the mayor spoke about upcoming community projects, interjecting now and then with questions that earned her nods of approval. The conversations around the table felt natural, unforced, and most importantly welcoming. Halfway through the evening, Carl stood and steered her toward the silent auction tables along the back wall. Crystal bowls, framed paintings of Savannah's squares, and even a weekend getaway to Tybee Island were neatly displayed. The air smelled faintly of fresh varnish from the polished wood floor, and the low hum of bidding guests filled the space. Darlene was already there, peering at the description for a hand-stitched quilt in soft blues and greens. "This would look perfect in your guest room," she said, pen poised over the bid sheet. "I think you just want an excuse to visit more often," Maggie teased. "Guilty," Darlene said, and wrote down her name. When they returned to the table, dessert was being served, pecan pie with whipped cream. Maggie took a bite, and let the sweetness linger. The mayor leaned toward her. "We need more people like you in this city, quietly effective, but unafraid to act when it counts." It was the kind of sentence Maggie knew would make Brian roll his eyes if he ever heard it. The thought made her smile, not out of spite, but with the private satisfaction of knowing she was being recognized in rooms he'd never even step into. By the end of the night, Maggie felt less like a guest and more like part of something. The warm goodbyes, the handshake from the mayor, the way people had sought her out to talk, it all settled into her like a gentle weight she didn't want to put down. She didn't hear it directly, but she knew word would travel, and it did. By Tuesday, mutual friends were mentioning to Brian and Lori that Maggie had been rubbing elbows with the mayor at the fundraiser. Lori's tight-lipped smile in the grocery store aisle said enough. She knew, and it stung. Later that week, Maggie checked her mail and found a cream-colored envelope addressed in careful handwriting. Inside was a folded note on thick stationery, the city's seal embossed at the top. "Dear Mrs. Lane," it read, "thank you for your generous support of our community initiatives. Your presence at the recent fundraiser was greatly appreciated. I look forward to working with you on future projects." It was signed, Mayor Elizabeth Whitaker. Maggie stood on her porch, the letter smooth in her hands, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across her lawn. Somewhere down the street, wind moved through the moss in the oaks, and she smiled, knowing this was only the beginning. Carl's office was quiet except for the faint hum of the ceiling fan, and the soft shuffling of papers as he laid the final documents in front of Maggie. The blinds were tilted half shut, letting in narrow bands of morning sunlight that cut across the polished wood desk. "This," Carl said, tapping the top page, "locks everything in. Your estate, your assets, all distributed exactly the way you want. No loopholes, no back doors." Maggie took the pen, feeling the smooth weight of it in her fingers. "And there's nothing they can contest?" Carl's smile was small but certain. "Not with the way we've structured it. You've got clear directives, charitable beneficiaries, and now," he slid another page forward, "Darlene named as executor." Maggie glanced over at her friend, sitting in the leather chair to her right. Darlene raised her brows and gave a quick, conspiratorial grin. "Guess I'll be keeping more than your recipe cards safe." With each signature, Maggie felt another thread loosen from the tangle that had been binding her since Brian's first refusal to drive her. The ink was bold and deliberate, her name anchored to the page in steady strokes. The instructions were as precise as she could make them. The silver sedan to be sold with proceeds to Safe Harbor Rescue, the remainder of her savings divided among the shelter, a local food bank, and a scholarship fund for high school seniors. Brian and Lori's names appeared nowhere, except in the revocation clause Carl had insisted remain for legal clarity. When it was done, Carl gathered the papers into a neat stack, his movements unhurried but final. "I'll file these with the court this afternoon," he said. "As of today, no one touches a thing without your say-so." Maggie let out a slow breath. "Feels like I just locked the last door." Darlene patted her arm and swallowed the key. They left the office and drove toward the riverfront for lunch. The day was bright, the sunlight scattering on the water like a handful of coins. At the cafe terrace, the breeze carried the scent of fried shrimp and lemon wedges. Maggie chose a table by the railing, where she could see the slow churn of a tugboat moving past. Molly curled under her chair, her warm flank pressing lightly against Maggie's sandals. The server brought iced tea beaded with condensation, the glass cool in her hands. Maggie ordered crab cakes, Darlene the shrimp pox boy. They talked about the fundraiser, about the mayor's note, about nothing at all, because sometimes it was enough just to sit in good company with the day stretching open in front of them. Halfway through lunch, a couple at the next table leaned over. "We heard what you did for Safe Harbor," the woman said with a smile. "That's going to change lives." Maggie thanked her, accepting the compliment without deflection. She was learning how to do that. By the time they finished dessert, shared key lime pie, tart enough to make her eyes water, the afternoon sun had shifted, the shadows lengthening across the boardwalk. Maggie paid the bill before Darlene could argue, and gave Molly a small piece of leftover crust under the table. Walking back to the car, Maggie paused at the railing to look out over the river. The water shimmered in the light, moving at its own steady pace, carrying whatever it didn't need farther downstream. Something in that movement lodged in her mind, a reminder that she didn't have to stay anchored in one place. She thought about the rooms in her house she rarely entered, the lawn she no longer enjoyed keeping up, the echoes of Brian's voice in the driveway when he'd first refused her. She turned to Darlene, the decision forming so clearly, it was almost startling. "You know," Maggie said slowly, "I think I might sell the house next." 2 days after deciding, Maggie found herself in the passenger seat of Darlene's sedan, cruising toward the historic district. The air was sharp with early spring, and the streets smelled faintly of rain on brick from the night before. "I want somewhere I actually use every room," Maggie said, watching the moss sway over the road, "and no lawn big enough for a football game." Darlene grinned. "We'll find you a place where you can drink your coffee on the porch without wondering if the gutters need cleaning." They toured 3 properties before noon. The first was too dark, the second backed up to a busy street, but the third, tucked between 2 magnolia trees on a quiet lane, stopped Maggie in her tracks. It was a pale yellow cottage with white trim and a deep front porch. The air smelled faintly of honeysuckle from the vine winding west up one of the porch posts. In the back, a small fenced yard stretched just far enough for a dog to run without disappearing. Inside, sunlight spilled across warm pine floors. The kitchen had a window over the sink that framed a slice of blue sky. 2 bedrooms, just enough closet space, and a little reading nook by the fireplace that made her think of rainy afternoons with Molly curled at her feet. "This is it," Maggie said quietly, running her hand along the smooth edge of the kitchen counter. Darlene was already pulling out her phone. "I'll get the agent on the line. We're making an offer before someone else spots this gem." Negotiations moved quickly. Darlene knew which details to push on, and when to let silence work in their favor. By the end of the week, Maggie had a signed contract, and by the end of the month, she was standing in her new living room, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes. The neighborhood greeted her like she'd always been there. Mrs. Howard from next door brought over lemon bars, just to welcome you. 2 doors down, a retired couple waved every morning from their porch swing. The street was quiet, except for the occasional bike bell, or the hum of a lawnmower somewhere in the distance. Molly claimed the backyard immediately. The first time Maggie let her out, the dog bounded in widening circles, ears flapping, tail spinning like a propeller. She chased a squirrel to the fence, then trotted back with a look that could only be described as smug. Afternoons became a rhythm. Maggie didn't know she'd been craving, reading on the porch while the breeze carried the scent of blooming azaleas, walking Molly down brick-paved sidewalks shaded by oaks, stopping to chat with neighbors tending flower beds. One Saturday evening, as the sun slid low and painted the cottage in amber light, Maggie sat on her porch with a glass of sweet tea, Molly sprawled on the steps. The air was still except for the occasional chirp of a cardinal in the magnolia. That's when she heard the low, familiar growl of an engine. A dark SUV turned onto her street. Even before it came close, she recognized the shape of the driver's shoulders, the set of his jaw behind the windshield. Brian. The vehicle slowed as it passed her house, the driver's side window gliding down just far enough for her to see his eyes flick toward her, then toward the cottage, then back to her again. Maggie didn't move. She took a slow sip of tea, her gaze steady. Molly rose, tail wagging uncertainly, sensing the shift in the air. Brian's SUV rolled past, lingering just long enough for the sound of the tires on pavement to stretch into something heavier than the moment itself. At the corner, he turned without signaling, disappearing down the next street. Maggie set her glass down, the condensation leaving a small wet ring on the porch rail. She stroked Molly's head, feeling the steady warmth beneath her palm. The street was quiet again, but her pulse had a measured quickness to it. The morning broke soft and golden, sunlight spilling through the lace curtains of the cottage and warming the pine floors. Molly's tail thumped against the side of the bed as Maggie swung her legs over, the air carrying that faint salty tang that meant the coast was calling. "Let's go for a drive," she told the dog, and Molly's ears perked as if she'd understood every word. They set out just after 8, the silver sedan gliding easily down the tree-lined streets. The oaks arched overhead, moss swaying in the morning breeze, scattering light in moving patterns across the hood. Maggie cracked the window, letting the air carry in the scent of marsh grass and distant tide. Within 20 minutes, the landscape opened to the coast. Water shimmered beneath the rising sun, the horizon stretched in a hazy, endless line. Maggie rolled the window all the way down, feeling the wind lift a strand of hair against her cheek. Molly's nose was pressed to the open crack of the back window, ears flapping, breathing in the briny air, like it was something precious. She followed the familiar 2-lane road along the water, passing weathered docks and the occasional fisherman already ankle-deep, casting lines into the shallows. The tide was low, revealing ripples of wet sand and scattered shells that winked in the light. By the time she reached the cafe, the parking lot was already half full. The place sat perched on the edge of the marsh, white shutters open to catch the breeze. Inside, the scent of fresh-baked biscuits and frying bacon wrapped around her like a blanket. Her usual table by the window was open. She ordered scrambled eggs, grits and coffee so dark it almost glowed. While she ate, she watched the sunlight glint off the rippling water outside. Molly waiting patiently in the car's shade with a bowl of water she'd set out. Halfway through breakfast, a couple at the next table caught her eye. "Morning, Maggie," the man said with a nod. She smiled. "Morning, Joe. How's the boat running?" "Better than ever," he replied. His wife chimed in. "And that dog of yours, sweetest thing I've ever met." They chatted for a few minutes, the conversation easy, familiar. These were the kind of exchanges she'd missed back in the old neighborhood, where most doors stayed shut, and the air always seemed to hum with someone else's business. When she left the cafe, a few other locals waved as she passed, their faces warm with recognition. She waved back, a quiet pride blooming in her chest. These people didn't know her as someone's mother or mother-in-law. They knew her for her own name, her own presence. The drive back was unhurried. She stopped once at a roadside pull-off, stepping out to watch a pelican skim the water before diving with a splash. The air was cooler here, tinged with the scent of seaweed drying in the sun. By late afternoon, the sun had shifted low, casting the marsh in deep golds and soft shadows. The sedan hummed smoothly along the final stretch toward home, Molly's steady breathing filling the quiet between them. The cottage came into view, its pale yellow siding glowing in the last light. Maggie turned into the drive, gravel crunching under the tires. She parked and sat for a moment with her hands resting on the wheel, taking in the sight of her own small sanctuary, the porch, the magnolia, the fenced yard where Molly could run without a care. She stepped out, the air cooling as the sun dipped toward the horizon. Molly bounded up the steps ahead of her, nails clicking on the wood. Maggie followed, keys in hand, and locked the car with a solid, satisfying beep. She paused on the porch, letting her gaze sweep once more over the quiet street, the soft spill of light through the branches, the home she had chosen entirely on her own. Some rides you wait for, others you take yourself.